Well, hello there, my name is HW, and thank you so much for watching Tone Junkie TV. My friends, we're talking about compression today, and the three sort of types of compression that you can really get in the Kemper. Now, there's a lot of options, and there's a lot of variation and ways to get compression, but first let's start out by talking about what is compression for a moment. Compression is something that happens in all of the tube-driven machines that we've made to create sound, tube amps. It happens in all of them. And it happens when you use a tube. It creates something called compression. Compression is then the taking of high parts of a signal and low parts of a signal and squashing them together into something more uniform in dynamics. So that means our louds become a little bit softer, and our softs or lows become a little bit louder. That's a very rudimentary way to put it. Now, there's different parameters that we run into a lot of times with compressors, and so I've pulled up here the 65 Twin NB1 profile. It's from a 65 Twin reverb pack from Tone Junkie, and it's a beautiful profile. It's just clean. This is exactly how you get out of the pack, and if you want to follow along with me, you're more than welcome to, but we're going to talk and learn a lot about compression in the Kemper. So if you're familiar at all with Tone Junkie profiles, you will notice that I almost always have a compressor on at a very light setting. Compression in a tube amplifier is so important because you can't get away from it. You can't get around it. Compression exists with every tube gain stage. Every gain stage is imparting different amounts of compression. And so in a studio environment, you would really select where you want to run external compressors, but we also would have to recognize that compression is happening even in every amplifier, in every preamp, in every microphone. There's some level of compression, some level of limiting and boosting that's happening with different frequencies. So right here, let's take a look at the Kemper compressor. Here's the stomp compressor. Without it, it sounds like this. It sounds real good. It's real nice. If I turn on the compressor, it's set very light. It's set almost to sort of be like you don't really even notice it. The guitar just feels sweeter and a little punchier. It just is made to feel like the notes are jumping off the fretboard a little bit. Okay, now there I said it feels like the guitar, the notes are just jumping off the fretboard a little bit. That's the sensation, but let's talk about why that sensation is existing. Here we have the intensity control. Now on the Kemper, the intensity control measures how much compression there's going to be. But here's the first thing you got to know about this control. It doesn't work as you might expect. From on zero, there's no compression happening. There's none. You've now bypassed the compressor. As you roll the intensity up, anywhere between 0 and 5, all that this compressor is doing is actually just affecting the top parts of our signal. So it's taking the top portions of that signal and compressing it down to a more even dynamic. So here it is at 4.3. Now there, I'm getting a little bit louder. Why is that? Well, I have this volume control up here. And so I suppose actually as I put intensity to 0, even this volume is being bypassed because it did seem to get louder. 0 to 5, I'm just limiting. It really is acting like a limiter. Why is that important? Well, by boosting our signal in front of the amp, we're going to get just a bit more punch and juice. It's making the guitar hotter without changing the sort of the EQ and the voice of these pickups. I'm getting just a little bit of hotness, a little bit of boost. This gives me a more lively feeling. But by limiting, the top part of my signal, taking my highest peaks and compressing them down a little bit, I now am getting a very uniform sound, but by not touching the bottom of my signal, I still maintain all of the dynamic feel that I want when I'm playing the guitar, so that I can attack hard like this, or I can attack soft like this. Now, I have a fair amount of compression there. I would normally have it right here or less. So again, here's my hard attack. And here's my soft attack. See, it's allowing my attack to determine the volume that's also coming through the compressor. There's another reason that this would be. I have the attack set to 2.5 and the squash set to 0. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I have the mix set to 85. If I turn the mix to 100, I'm now hearing only the compressed signal. This allows me to bypass the compressor in some way and pass some of my unaffected guitar signal through. Why is that important? When we turn off a compressor, we get 100% of the transient, the attack of the note, the first initial clack pop sound. When we add compression for sustain, the compressor is usually strong enough that it's going to sort of inhibit that initial attack, especially when we get into attack. We're going to talk about that. Turning that back on for a moment. I almost can't hear the difference between a maxed out mix and like an 85% mix. I can't really hear it. But I feel a little something. There's a little more like just liveliness and attack that I enjoy. So I usually leave that between 75 and 85 really. I sometimes like to venture down here a little less. Now, let's leave this at 85, because that's where I have it and that's where I enjoy it. Attack. Attack at higher compression settings, which I'm going to do now to show you what attack does to make it easiest. When I have the compressor all the way at 0, we're going to get the most immediate attack on the notes. And you can hear the compressor sort of cling on if you listen. Here is the longer attack. You really got to listen, and if you're on a phone or something, you might not hear this, but really it's clamping down and grabbing that signal and then compressing it, and as it decays, it's bringing up the bottom end, again, because I have the intensity past half. So I'm going to turn up the intensity even more. So past the 5-point on intensity, again, we're affecting both the top peak and the bottom peak of the signal, or the trough of the signal. And it's not really a trough because it's not a wave, but it's the top and it's the soft and the it's not the bottom. It's the softer parts of the peak. And it just holds. It grabs quickly and holds. If I turn this all the way up, it's the max level. It's still even grabbing. Okay, now let's talk about the squash control. This is the most interesting control by far. You don't find this in most compressors. The squash control at the middle behaves just as you would normally expect. As you decrease the squash control, squash in this case, what it's doing and what it feels like are kind of two very different things. Decreasing the squash gives you this sort of feeling that what you're playing just isn't getting so squishy. That doesn't feel squashed down, it feels like a lot of sustain. When I put it all the way at 10, you get this volume sag and this bloom. Why is that important? Early vintage compressors all functioned with a ton of squash. When I pick hard, I can't get any more out of the note because the compressor seems to almost grab and then raise the volume. It's really limiting my top amount. Now, that might seem like HW, isn't that intensity? Didn't we already talk about limiting the top amount? It has to do with which part of the frequencies that are getting into the compressor is it then going to compress and emphasize. So that's very squashed because I get this volume sag. So when I'm attacking, very funky, very squished, very squishy, squashy. But when I turn it all the way down, I'm still going to get a high level of compression, but now it's going to emphasize that first attack, which is going to make me feel like I have sustain, but without squishing me and limiting me down. A ton of sustain is still there. You get what I'm saying? It's this amount of squash. They named it correctly. Now, the three types of compressors that I wanted to talk about, now that we've understood how this compressor works, because it's very important for understanding how we can get these different types of compression. There's three types of compressors really in the Kemper, or there's three abilities to achieve and control your amount of desired compression. Those are going to be compressor in front of the amp, compressor after the amp, and compression in the amp itself. Let's start with number one. So for compressors in front of the amp, we have two options. We can put the compressor in front as the very first thing, or we can put it after our gain. Let's talk about why that would be. And really quickly, I'm gonna paste this here because I copied the compressor and now I'm gonna paste it. So I have identical compressors before and after. So placing the compressor in front of our green screen, let's start with no compression. It sounds like this. With the green screen. And let's increase that green scream a bit just to give us a little more dirt because we want to hear some of that dirt and we want to let it kind of come through. So we want a nice little greeny, screamy sound. That's a good sound. Let's put a compressor in front of it. Now we're already getting more compression because that green scream is a compressed sort of sounding overdrive already, but let's try compressor after it. That's me playing sort of lightly. Let me try playing that same thing in front. It's dirtier, it's more broken up. Why is that? Because my compressor is evening out some of my top dynamics and boosting my signal a bit. Remember we talked about that's how we had it set up? To boost the signal a bit and to make it feel a little lively under my strings. The effect that's having is to boost that signal in the front of the amp, makes it livelier, but now my drives are a little hotter, they're a little dirtier, they're a little less able to clean up. If people feel like the drives in the compressor are a little more compressed, I would say make sure you remove the compressor from in front of them. Try putting it afterwards. Now we are doing something interesting. We're putting compression after gain as opposed to before gain. This has profound effects on our touch sensitivity. We'll do another video on how to achieve more touch sensitivity in the Kemper in the future. It has to do, I think, with EQ and compression. But for now, just understand that compression after gain is going to allow us to have all the touch sensitivity that is in that gain stage, meaning when I hit soft, I'm going to get cleaner. Hit hard, I'm going to get more dirt. So then if I put a compressor after it, I'm going to even out my dynamics. So let's see if we can even out my dynamics by upping this, this intensity, doing a quick, let's leave the attack very short, and let's see if I can get my compressor to even out my dynamics, even though I have the touch sensitivity of a gain stage in front of it. So first I'll play very soft, then very light. My feeling, it's an overly compressed sound. I'm doing this to really get the point across. But now, even on my guitar, between these two pickup positions, where one is usually much softer, it's really just cleaner. It's the same volume. It's really a really amazing way by moving the compressor after a gain stage to get touch sensitivity and sort of effect. Here's with it off. Now off, I'm still going to get a similar effect. Here's that tube screamer back on. Again, off, and now on my in-between position. Compression like this is really essential too, like a really poppy strat tone too. It's a really different sensation than having the compressor in front. I hope you can hear that. You really got to try it and feel it for yourself. That's where it really gets interesting. Number two, the second type of compressor in the Kemper is unique to the Kemper. I'm unaware of any other device that does this. In the amplifier section, this compressor right here is the single most valuable compressor in the world. Why? You don't even need to call this compressor. It should be called touch sensitivity. Here's why it's so special. You cannot do this in a tube amplifier. You can only do this in the digital world, and only they have done it to my knowledge. This is not a compression effect on the amplifier itself. This is an effect that actually increases the compression and the sensitivity to dynamics. I'm sorry, it doesn't increase. This is actually the compression of the amplifier model or profile itself. So at 0, we're going to get the least amount of compression. Now I'm going to start turning it up, and I usually have this control at 1.5, but let me put it on 5.6. Very compressed, isn't it? Now, let me go to a completely different dirty profile and show you a secret that's been under your nose this whole time. Let me show you this. That, my friends, is the 1964 AC 10 Twin J5. That's a mouthful. Now, let's go into the amplifier section. Compression at 1.5, okay? Low. Let me crank it up and let's see what we hear. interesting. It feels more compressed, but not terribly more compressed. Let me try with no compression, cleaning it up with my dynamics. Now let me up this compressor and let's try that same thing again. Whoops. My friends, what's happening here is that this compression control actually does not affect gain. It doesn't affect dirty profiles. And since all profiles have this mix of clean and dirty in them, the cleaner a profile is, the more that compressor effect is going to affect the overall signal because the whole amplifier is clean. But the dirtier your profile gets, the more this compressor is going to only affect the clean part. So when you play soft, it's going to lift everything up. And it's going to make your soft playing, your cleans, when you are playing very soft and the amplifier is not distorting as much, it's going to make all of that signal come up. And it's going to bring the brightness out. That brightness is crucial for touch sensitivity. Because what we want, you never hear people describe a tone as touch sensitive. It never happens. Never. You will notice that. By the way, it's 100% true. Just go find it anywhere. I've noticed this since the very beginning when I got into guitar. Bright things were what people said were touch sensitive. Never overly dark. Because you want your cleans to be bright. When you then go and dirty it up, you want the gain and mid-range to come up as it does with gain. Think Eric Johnson, very clean twin, right? Very clean. But then you want that searing lead sound. Well, Eric Johnson, I am not, but you understand what I'm saying here. We get touch sensitivity that sensation of touch sensitivity when we have a compressor when we have compression, not a compressor, but we have compression that when we hit lightly, the volume evens out, but the gain comes down. And tubes do that wonderfully. But my friends, this does it so much better. We have so much more control over it right here in this parameter. It's invaluable. It's one of the reasons the Kemper is better than a tube amp and is just the best thing on the planet. Okay, now the last compressor spot or the last type of compression is post-amp compression. This is a type of compression or a location for compression that is going to be very popular in studio environments and pretty much in all recorded music. You're not going to hear it in live music as much, but it would be very common to take a guitar signal in the older days when we were all using all analog gear to take mics into pre's through a little compressor, just sweeten it up a bit. Maybe a 1176, maybe an LA2A, but you would just do that. It just kisses it. They call it kissing, and that's the term that's used a lot of times. The compressor is just kissing the signal. It's just making it a little sweeter, just a little evening out. It usually can sometimes bring the high end up a little bit, bring some of the lowest bass up a little bit, and it just gives you the sweetening. For our purpose, I'm going to put our compressor right here in this slot, same compressor we were using before up front. And the settings can be a little different, but you'll hear this. Without any compressor, it sounds like this. Now some compressor after the amplifier section. turned into a little Amazing Grace there for a second. But you hear that? You hear that without it on the in-between position? Now with it on. If you want a real studio grade kind of feel, I would highly recommend putting some compression after the amp, even if you leave it light. Now, even light, I can tell you there's a good amount of difference. Let's bring this intensity way down, and we're just going to limit the top a little bit. And it is boosting the signal a little bit. Now, we don't necessarily need that. We actually could bring it back. We also can just mix in a little bit of this, but you're gonna hear there's just a real kiss on a compressor like this. Again, without it. And just so we can see those controls, I am a little less on the intensity. You still get a little of the grab. Really, if you just want to add sustain and a little bit of, if you just want to compress, my point is, if you want to just compress the signal like a sound man would, this is where you place it. And you can do it after or before delays. I prefer right here because then it lets my delays and my reverbs go in and out, and it doesn't try to grab the decaying, delay. If you put it all the way at the end, you really have to be very gentle with it. And you definitely cannot turn it past 5, or you're going to start negatively affecting the decay of the delays. It's going to try and grab those and bring it up. So if you want low settings, but if you want even a moderate to high setting, I'll put it up at 6.1, and this should be fairly aggressive with a quick attack, and you're going to hear that. You just get this wonderful pop of a Strat, that really clack even comes out a little bit. And it grabs a sort of that string noise. It takes that clack, that string noise, and really makes it just feel really great. What's interesting is it has a more compressed sound than I'm feeling because it grabs that extra clack. It actually, the audio, it's one of the rare instances where a compressor can actually feels less to me. I still feel an amount of sensitivity, but because I have all that, because I'm hitting the amp straight in with no compressor between me and the amp, so I feel the amp, but it's really evening out the dynamic. That's it. That's the 3 types of compressors. And guys, that's pretty much everything I know about the compressor in the Kemper. I could call this video everything I know about the compressors in the Kemper. I hope you've enjoyed this. We can have compressor in the front, compressor in the amp, which is revolutionary. Nothing like it exists. Holy cow, go buy a Kemper right now if you don't have one. You didn't watch this far in the video if you don't have a Kemper, trust me. Or you put it after and it's like a studio effect that just kisses the amplifier. I mean, it's really, gosh, the Kemper is so amazing. Anyway, I've been HW. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe. It really helps the YouTube and Facebook algorithm. Even share it with a friend. Tell a friend, tell a group or something. It really helps support Tone Junkie. I hope you guys are staying safe, and thank you so much for all the support over the many months and years. I always want to make sure I get really in-depth content in on the channel, even with all the fun we have. I want people to know about how great this thing is and why it's better than tube amps. It really is. Anyway, I've been HW. Thanks so much for watching Tone Junkie TV. HW, out.